"Dad, I sold your house to buy my wife a new Porsche. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your things and get out." My son looked me straight in the eye as he said those words, his voice cold and flat, completely lacking any warmth or hesitation. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw a tantrum as he expected me to do. I simply stood there and smiled, because he did not know that the house had already been sold years ago, and the police were already on their way to dismantle his comfortable, stolen existence. I am Conrad Blackwood, 66 years old. For the last decade, my family thought I was just a retired bookkeeper living on a fixed pension, pinching pennies to get by. They saw my worn-out cardigans, my scuffed shoes, and my 10-year-old sedan, and they assumed I was a harmless, lonely old man who was slowly fading away. But before I retired, I was a senior forensic accountant for the federal government. I spent 30 years hunting down money launderers, corrupt politicians, tax evaders, and corporate executives who thought they were smarter than the system. For instance, I spent 18 months working with the Department of Justice on the offshore shell structures of a prominent technology firm in Seattle. They had routed over $300 million through subsidiary licensing companies in Ireland and the Cayman Islands to avoid domestic taxes. I personally traced the electronic wire trail through 24 layers of transactions, identifying the exact signatures of the executives who signed off on the fraud. They thought they were invisible behind their corporate walls. But I laid the evidence out in front of them, and 3 of them are still in federal prison today. I know how to find hidden trails. I know how to track offshore accounts. And I certainly know how to bury a financial trap so deep that the greedy will walk straight into it without noticing. Before I tell you how I dismantled my son's life, piece by piece, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to ungrateful family members. The sound of my vintage leather suitcase hitting the bottom of the hardwood stairs echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. It was a heavy, final sound that shattered the remaining peace in this house. I stood at the top of the landing looking down at the foyer. My suitcase, the one I had carried on business trips to Zurich, London, and the Cayman Islands during my active government days, lay upside down on the floor, scuffed and disrespected. My son Tyler stood blocking the front door, his arms crossed over his chest. He was 32 years old, wearing a designer suit that I knew he had put on a high-interest credit card he couldn't afford to pay off. Tyler had always been obsessed with appearances. As a child, he wanted the most expensive toys, throwing hysterical tantrums in the middle of department stores if we didn't buy him the latest gadgets. As a teenager, he demanded designer clothes and refused to wear anything that didn't feature a prominent logo, embarrassed to be seen in the clothes his mother bought for him. I remember for his high school graduation, he demanded a luxury Swiss watch that cost more than my monthly salary at the time. When Martha and I instead gifted him a beautiful, reliable watch that had belonged to my own father, he didn't even say thank you. He simply tossed it into his desk drawer and never wore it, complaining that his friends would laugh at him. Martha and I had tried so hard to teach him the value of hard work and honest living, but the seeds of entitlement and comparison had already taken deep root in his soul, fed by a society that valued wealth over character. After Martha passed, the entitlement grew into a full-blown obsession with status. He married Brittany, a woman who shared his hollow values. Brittany was a local influencer who spent her days taking photos of expensive meals she didn't eat and posing in front of cars she didn't own. Brittany was currently perched on the mahogany hallway bench I had purchased with Martha 30 years ago. She was scrolling through her Instagram feed, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the screen. She was completely detached from the reality of the situation. She ignored the scuffed leather of my suitcase. She ignored the look of cold panic hidden beneath Tyler's arrogance. She only cared about the image they were presenting to their friends. To them, I was just a temporary obstacle in their quest for the perfect life. They wanted a modern house with white walls, a massive garage for their luxury cars, and a lifestyle that would make their followers envious. They had no respect for the history of this Victorian home, no respect for the decades of hard work it represented. They only saw a $1.8 million paycheck that they could burn on their vanity. In Tyler's right hand, he dangled a car key, a Porsche key. The metal crest caught the light from the crystal chandelier above, casting a sharp reflection on the wall. "Dad, let's be real," Tyler said, his voice smooth and devoid of any shame. "This Victorian heap is too cramped for us. The layout is outdated, and the garage is a joke. It barely fits my sedan, let alone the SUV. Brittany needs her space. Her new Macan arrives on Tuesday, and I am not parking a $90 zero luxury car on the street where it could get scratched by the neighborhood kids." I looked at the crown molding I had restored with my own hands, piece by piece, after my late wife Martha passed away. This house, sitting on a prime hill in a wealthy suburb of Seattle, was worth $1.8 million. And Tyler thought he owned it. He thought he had the right to sell it, because 5 years ago, right before I went in for a major triple bypass surgery, I had signed a power of attorney giving him control over my assets, just in case I did not survive the operation. He did not know that the document explicitly expired the moment I walked out of the hospital recovery room, signed off by the chief medical officer. And he certainly did not know that the title of this house was not even in my name anymore. I had transferred it to a private charitable trust years ago to ensure it would never be sold for personal greed. Brittany finally looked up from her phone, her eyes cold and impatient. She pushed her styled blonde hair back and sighed loudly. "Tyler, hurry it up. We have reservations at Nobu in an hour, and I don't want to be late because of this old drama." Tyler nodded at her, then turned his cold gaze back to me. "We took a deposit on the house this morning, Dad. A cash buyer. Quick close. They want possession in 48 hours. I used some of the money to book you a room at Sunny Valley. It's paid up for a month. You'll like it there. They have weekly bingo, full-time staff to watch you, and people your own age to talk to." Sunny Valley was a state-funded nursing home on the other side of the city, notorious for its smell of bleach and boiled cabbage, its indifferent staff, and its depressing atmosphere. He was discarding me like an old piece of furniture, to make room for his wife's luxury car and to clear his own path. Most fathers would have yelled, they would have pleaded or cried, asking how their own flesh and blood could be so heartless and ungrateful. But I felt a cold, calm wash over me. It was the same icy focus I used to get when I sat in interrogation rooms across from corporate fraudsters who had just realized I found their double ledgers. I adjusted my glasses and looked at my watch. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. The financial institutions would be closing soon, but my personal lawyer's office was always open for me. "You took a deposit," I repeated, my voice steady, low, and completely calm. $50,000, Tyler bragged, a smug smirk playing on his lips. Non-refundable. The buyer was desperate for the location and agreed to all our terms. "It's done, Dad. Don't try to make a scene or appeal to my emotions. Just pack your shaving kit and go." He really believed he had won. He believed I was a senile old man who had forgotten about the details of my own estate. He believed the house was his inheritance to burn for his wife's vanity and his own foolishness. I walked down the stairs slowly, my hand gliding over the smooth wood of the banister. I stepped over my suitcase, picked it up, and dusted off the leather. I looked my son in the eye. He looked so much like his mother, but he had none of her kindness, none of her warmth. He had only her appetite for expensive things, without any of the work ethic required to earn them. "Okay," I said. Tyler blinked, surprised by how easy it was. He had expected a fight, a long argument, perhaps even a physical refusal. He exchanged a confused look with Brittany, who finally put her phone down, her brow furrowing slightly. "Good," Tyler huffed, puffing out his chest to regain his confidence. He tossed the Porsche key into the air and caught it. "The Uber is outside. It will take you straight to the facility. Do not come back here without calling us first. We need our privacy to start our new life." I opened the heavy oak door. The cool Seattle rain hit my face, smelling of pine and wet asphalt. I turned back one last time, framing them in my memory like a photograph of a crime scene. Tyler with his arrogance, and Brittany with her greed. "Tyler," I said softly, "make sure you keep that deposit receipt somewhere safe." "Why?" he asked, annoyed by my question. "Because you are going to need it when you surrender yourself to the police for fraud." I did not wait for his answer. I closed the door behind me, shutting them into the house they thought was theirs, and walked out into the cool Seattle rain. I did not get into the Uber Tyler had called. I knew that Uber account was likely linked to my secondary family card anyway, and I wanted no further transactions associated with them. I picked up my vintage leather suitcase, the weight of it familiar and grounding in my hand, and walked 2 blocks down the hill, through the wet streets. The rain was coming down harder now, cold drops soaking into my cardigan, but I didn't care. It felt clean, like washing away years of quiet disrespect. I walked into a small, warm coffee shop on the corner, the smell of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon pastries welcoming me. The barista, a young college student with a kind smile, looked at my damp clothes with concern. "Rough day out there, sir?" she asked as she handed me a towel. "Actually," I said, offering a genuine smile, "it's the best day I've had in years." I ordered a hot Americano and sat in a quiet corner booth near the window, watching the rain pool on the asphalt outside. As I warmed my hands around the cup, my mind drifted back to the first day Martha and I had walked into that Victorian house on Hillside Drive. It was 1989. The house was in disrepair, the paint peeling, the garden overgrown with weeds. But Martha had looked at the high ceilings, the bay windows, and the historic woodwork, and she had seen a home. We spent 3 years restoring it ourselves, spending our weekends sanding floors, stripping layers of old paint, and planting rose bushes in the garden. It was the house where Tyler took his first steps, where we celebrated every birthday, and where I cared for Martha during her final battle with illness. That house was a monument to our lives, our love, and our shared history. And Tyler thought he could reduce all of that to a $50,000 cash payment to Marcus and a Porsche Macan for his status-obsessed wife. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. He was about to find out that the foundation of our family was built on much stronger stuff than he realized. I opened my phone, bypassed the standard apps, and accessed my private, encrypted car service app, booking a private town car to pick me up at the corner. 30 minutes later, I was not checking into the bleak hallways of Sunny Valley. I was walking into the grand, marble-floored lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel downtown, where the air was warm and smelled of fresh lilies. The head concierge, a man named Arthur, who had managed my account for over 20 years and knew the true depth of my financial standing, stood up immediately as I approached. He looked past my damp cardigan and my vintage suitcase, seeing only the loyal, high-value client I had always been. "Welcome back, Mr. Blackwood," Arthur said, bowing his head discreetly. "It is a pleasure to see you. The presidential suite on the top floor is ready for you. As always, we have ensured the fireplace is lit and your preferred tea is stocked." I handed him my black titanium credit card. The one with the limitless ceiling, the one Tyler did not even know existed, because I kept it registered under my private holding corporation. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "I appreciate the promptness. Please have a bottle of single malt scotch sent up as well." "Immediately, sir," he replied, swiping the card. It cleared instantly, a silent transaction that confirmed my true power in this city. The presidential suite was magnificent. It featured high ceilings, plush velvet furniture, a private study with a roaring stone fireplace, and a large balcony overlooking the dark waters of Puget Sound. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, watching the lights of the ferries cut through the misty harbor. I poured a glass of scotch, letting the warm, rich liquid settle in my throat. The weight I had carried for years was gone. I sat down in the leather executive chair, opened my secure laptop, and prepared for the final phase. I was about to show Tyler that some books can never be balanced with lies. Once I was in the room, overlooking the gray waters of the Puget Sound, I poured myself a glass of single malt scotch. I stood by the window, watching the ferries cut through the dark water. I took a sip, letting the warm liquid settle in my chest. Then I pulled out my encrypted phone and dialed a number I had not used in 3 years. When the voice on the other end answered, I spoke. "Wainwright, it is Conrad." The lawyer's voice was instantly crisp and sharp as a razor. "Mr. Blackwood, it has been a long time. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Initiate phase 1, I said, looking at my reflection in the glass. "Freeze the trust fund, and Wainwright, get the fraud unit on the line. My son just sold a house that belongs to a charitable trust. He took a $50,000 deposit. I want you to make sure that when he wakes up tomorrow morning, he realizes that money is the most expensive thing he ever touched. I hung up the phone and sat in the velvet armchair. The wheels of justice were turning, and my son had no idea what was coming. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at exactly 7:00 a.m. For the first time in 20 years, I did not wake up to the sound of my son screaming at his wife or the heavy bass of their loud music shaking the walls. I woke up to absolute golden silence. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and crisp against my skin, a stark contrast to the lumpy mattress I had been sleeping on in the guest room back at the house. I lay there for a moment, just breathing. It is strange how we get used to carrying a heavy weight until the moment we finally set it down. I sat up and rang room service. Within 10 minutes, James rolled in a cart with a pot of Earl Grey tea, fresh fruit and warm croissants. He poured the tea with a grace that belonged to a different era. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," he said softly. "Is there anything else I can get for you today?" I looked at him. He was a stranger. I paid his wages through my hotel bill. Yet, in 2 minutes, he had shown me more respect than my own son had shown me in 2 decades. I tipped him $100. He bowed and left without a sound. I took my tea to the balcony from the 30th floor. The city looked like a circuit board, organized, logical, and operating under strict rules. I felt a sense of clarity returning to my mind. For years, I had convinced myself that I stayed in that house because they needed me. I told myself that Tyler couldn't manage the bills, that Brittany needed support, that they needed a family foundation. But standing there, watching the traffic flow far below, I admitted the truth to myself. I hadn't stayed because they needed me. I stayed because I was afraid of being alone after Martha passed. But this solitude was not scary. It was empowering. I was surrounded by luxury that I had earned with 30 years of solving complex financial crimes. I had millions in bank assets, trust funds, and a portfolio that grew while I slept. Yet for the last 10 years, I had been eating leftovers and asking permission to watch the news on my own television. I took a sip of tea. It tasted like freedom. As I stood on that balcony, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic mug, I let the cool Seattle mist settle on my face. For 10 years, I had deliberately played the role of the retired, penny-pinching bookkeeper. When my beloved wife Martha passed away, she left a massive void in my life, but she also left me with a clear mind. She had always warned me that Tyler was growing too soft, too enamored with the lifestyles of the wealthy clients I audited. "Conrad," she had said to me on her hospital bed, "promise me you won't let our wealth ruin him. If he thinks he can coast through life on your hard work, he will never become a man of character." So, after her funeral, I decided to test him. I moved into the guest room, wore worn-out cardigans, and drove a 10-year-old sedan. I wanted to see if Tyler would visit me when there were no luxury dinners to be had, if he would care for his father when he thought I was living on a modest, fixed pension. The results were heartbreaking. The visits became fewer, the phone calls shorter. Only when he needed a cash loan or a signature did he show any interest. And now, he had thrown my suitcase down the stairs and sold the house behind my back. It was a cold realization, but it was also a liberation. The test was over, and Tyler had failed in the most spectacular way possible. I stepped back inside the suite and sat down at the mahogany desk. I ordered a second pot of tea and opened my iPad. While I was enjoying the calm view from the balcony, a very different scene was unfolding in the suburbs of Lake Forest. I know this because my iPad had a direct stream to the home security cameras I had secretly installed years ago to protect the property. I logged into the camera feed and saw my living room had been turned into a noisy party zone. It had been less than 3 hours since I walked out the door, and my son Tyler was already celebrating the erasure of his father. He had invited a dozen friends over, the kind of people who wear sunglasses indoors, speak in loud voices, and talk constantly about business ventures that never seem to launch. They were drinking the 50-year-old scotch I had been saving for Tyler's wedding day, passing the bottle around like it was cheap beer. Tyler stood in the center of the room, flushed and sweating from the alcohol, holding court like a king in a kingdom he had stolen. He had invited a group of his closest associates, the kind of superficial friends who only show up when the drinks are free. He had invited David, a fake startup founder who spent his time pitching blockchain real estate concepts to anyone who would listen. Chloe, a gold-digging influencer who spent the evening taking selfies in front of my fireplace. And Chad, a loud investment banker who spoke at maximum volume about his quarterly bonuses and his weekend trips to Vegas. They treated my home as if it were a cheap rental, putting their drinks on the wood tables without coasters, spilling wine on the Persian rugs, and laughing loudly at the historic family photos on the walls. "To everyone here tonight," Tyler shouted, climbing onto the leather ottoman and raising a crystal glass that used to belong to my late wife Martha. "To new beginnings and real estate dominance. The old bookkeeper has finally been cleared out, and the Porsche Macan is arriving tomorrow morning. We are finally going to live the life we deserve in this place." The room erupted in loud cheers and glasses clinking. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, sipping my hot tea, watching my son toast to my eviction. It was fascinating in a morbid way, like watching a train crash in slow motion. He was so confident. He was so sure that he had outsmarted his old father. He had no idea that every glass of wine they drank was being recorded, and every word they spoke was building the federal case against him. He truly believed the money from the house sale was his. He believed the $50,000 deposit was just the beginning of his endless wealth. But the real show was happening in the corner. Brittany was holding her phone up, the ring light reflecting in her eyes, broadcasting live to her 3,000 followers. I tapped on her profile and joined the stream anonymously. "Hey guys," she chirped, doing a little spin that showed off the crown molding of my foyer. "So, big update, we finally got the house, like fully ours. We had to move some things around, specifically a very grumpy, very old obstacle who just wouldn't let us live our truth." She walked through the hallway, pointing the camera at my library. "We are going to gut this whole room," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It smells like mothballs and depression in here. We're thinking a home gym, or maybe a content studio. And the best part, the toxic energy is gone. We sent him to a facility where he can be with his own kind. It is honestly a relief. We deserve this space. We deserve to breathe." I watched the comments roll in on her screen. "So happy for you, Queen. You deserve it." Toxic family is the worst. Toxic. That was the word she used to describe the man who paid for her student loans anonymously so she wouldn't start her marriage in debt. The man who covered their rent for 3 years under the guise of a housing grant so Tyler wouldn't feel like a failure. She walked into my library and picked up my vintage leather-bound books, throwing them on the floor, saying this room is a disaster of mothballs and bad vibes. Her followers commenting, "So aesthetic." Dump him. I turned off the iPad. I had seen enough. The anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a clarity sharp and cold as a scalpel. They were celebrating a victory on a battlefield they didn't even realize was mine. I picked up the secure line in the hotel room and dialed Wainwright. It was late, but Wainwright didn't sleep. He was a shark in a suit, and sharks are always moving. "We are live," Wainwright answered on the first ring. I looked out at the city lights of Seattle, rain streaking against the glass. "Wainwright, initiate the freeze on the Blackwood Trust." Section 4, Paragraph C, moral turpitude and gross misconduct. There was a pause on the line, the sound of keyboard typing. "You are triggering the nuclear option, Conrad. You know what this means. Once I lock it down, he loses the monthly stipend, the emergency access, the health insurance, and the future inheritance vesting. He will be destitute within 48 hours. I thought about the scotch bottle being passed around my living room. I thought about Brittany calling me a grumpy obstacle. "Do it," I said softly, "and Wainwright, make sure the notification hits his email tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, just as he is walking into the title office to sign the closing papers. I want him to feel the ground open up underneath him." "Understood," Wainwright said. "The account is frozen effective immediately. The $2 million trust in his name is now locked." I hung up the phone. Tyler didn't know about the $2 million. He knew he got a monthly allowance from a generic trust fund that I told him was left by a distant relative. He thought it was free money, a lucky break from the universe. He didn't know I was the trustee. He didn't know I was the source. I had set up that trust 10 years ago, burying the money deep in a complex web of LLCs to protect him from himself. I knew my son. I knew he was weak, easily manipulated, and prone to bad financial decisions. I wanted to ensure he would always have a safety net, food on the table, a roof over his head. But I included a clause, a kill switch designed for the exact moment he decided to bite the hand that fed him. If the beneficiary engages in criminal activity, fraud, or actions that endanger the trustee, the assets revert to the principal charity. By forging my signature on a power of attorney and selling a house that didn't belong to him, Tyler had just triggered the clause. But the truth was even darker than a new Porsche. What Brittany didn't know, and what Tyler was desperately hiding from her, was that he was running from dangerous loan sharks. Over the past year, Tyler had developed a severe gambling addiction, losing massive sums on unregulated sports betting apps and highly leveraged cryptocurrency trades. When the banks cut him off, he turned to a local criminal group run by a notorious loan shark named Marcus. Tyler had borrowed $100, which quickly ballooned to $150 with Marcus's exorbitant interest rates. Marcus was not the kind of man who accepted late payments. Tyler had received threatening text messages daily, and just last week, two large men had cornered him in the parking lot of his office, giving him a simple choice: pay the debt in full by Friday or end up in a hospital or worse. The $50,000 non-refundable cash deposit Tyler had taken from the buyer yesterday morning wasn't sitting in their savings account to pay for the Porsche. It had already been handed over to Marcus's courier in a plain manila envelope behind a grocery store in Bellevue. It was a desperate final payment to buy him 48 hours of safety. Tyler was banking everything on the closing of this house sale. He believed that once the remaining $1.75 million hit his account, he could pay off Marcus, pay off the Porsche dealer, and leave Seattle forever before anyone realized the fraud. He was running for his life, and he was using his father as a sacrifice to save himself. He was desperate. He needed the full $1.8 million from the house sale to pay off the rest of the debt and flee the state. The Porsche lease was a cover-up to satisfy Brittany's greed and make her look the other way. I walked to the minibar and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. On the screen, the party was finally winding down. Tyler was slumped on my leather sofa, looking at his phone, sweating despite the air conditioning. He looked so confident, so sure of his place in the world. He thought he was the king of the castle. He didn't know he was just a squatter in a house owned by a charity, spending money he no longer had, waiting for a car he couldn't pay for. The night was quiet in the hotel. The sheets were crisp and clean. I lay down, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day for my son. He was going to walk into a lawyer's office expecting a check for $1.8 million. Instead, he was going to find out that his father wasn't a retired bookkeeper. He was going to find out that the man he threw out like trash was the only thing standing between him and total ruin. And the worst part for him, he had already spent the deposit money. I closed my eyes and slept like a baby, while across town, my son drank to a future that had already been canceled. The morning rain in Seattle washed over the city in relentless gray sheets, blurring the lights of the harbor and turning the roads into slick, black ribbons. But the dismal weather did nothing to cool the feverish excitement consuming my son Tyler and his wife Brittany. They left my house at 8:30 a.m. sharp, driving aggressively through the bumper-to-bumper commuter traffic on Interstate 5. They were heading toward the downtown business district, running on pure adrenaline and the empty confidence of a victory they had not actually earned. From the quiet luxury of my hotel suite, I sat in a leather armchair with my iPad, watching the blue dot of the GPS tracker on Tyler's phone move steadily across the map. It was a tracking application I had secretly installed on his device months ago, right after he began asking strangely specific questions about my life insurance policies and the executor of my estate. In my 30 years of forensic accounting, I had learned a fundamental truth. People who plan to commit fraud always leave a digital trail, and desperate people leave highways. Tyler wasn't just selling my house to buy a luxury car. That was the shallow story he spun to satisfy Brittany's endless greed. The truth which I had uncovered weeks ago by auditing his personal bank statements and tracking his phone logs, was much darker. Tyler was running out of time. He had gotten deeply involved in high-stakes sports betting and illegal cryptocurrency platforms, accumulating a massive debt of $150,000 with a local criminal group run by a loan shark named Marcus. The $50,000 non-refundable cash deposit Tyler had taken from the buyer yesterday morning wasn't sitting in a bank account. It had already been transferred to Marcus's bagman in a dark parking lot to keep Marcus from breaking his legs. Tyler needed the remaining $1.75 million from the home sale to pay off the rest of his debt, pay off the Porsche lease, and flee the state before anyone realized what he had done. This transaction was his only way out of a very dark hole. At 8:55 a.m., the blue dot stopped. Tyler and Brittany had arrived at the glass and steel skyscraper of Apex Title and Escrow on the 42nd floor. The office was a monument to corporate wealth, all polished white marble, brushed chrome, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the misty Seattle harbor. They were immediately escorted by a receptionist into a large, glass-walled conference room. Sitting at the long mahogany table was Mrs. Gable, the escrow officer, alongside Mr. Henderson, the wealthy cash buyer, and his personal real estate attorney, Harrison. Tyler sat down, tossing his leather folder onto the glass tabletop with a flourish. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit, trying to project the image of a successful property developer. Brittany sat right next to him, smelling strongly of designer perfume, her eyes fixed on the escrow documents, as if she could already see the money. "Let's get this finalized," Tyler said, flashing his practiced salesman smile. "We have a very busy schedule today, and I'd like to get the wire transfer initiated as soon as possible." Mrs. Gable adjusted her reading glasses and pulled a stack of documents from her folder. She looked at the signature page, then at the certified copy of the power of attorney Tyler had submitted. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice professional and calm. "We have completed the preliminary verification on the buyer's funds. The escrow account has received the remaining $1.75 million from Mr. Henderson's cash account. We just need you to sign the final warranty deed under the power of attorney you provided. Once you sign, we will run the final automated title search to ensure no new liens or encumbrances have been filed in the last 12 hours. As soon as that is cleared, the funds will be wired directly to the corporate account you specified. The process usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes once the signatures are verified." Harrison, the buyer's lawyer, leaned forward and tapped his finger on the glass table. "My client is paying a premium for a quick close, Tyler. We want to make sure the keys are handed over today. We have a construction crew scheduled to begin surveying the property tomorrow morning. Mr. Henderson intends to subdivide the lot and build 3 modern luxury residences. We want to make sure there are no tenant issues and that your father has completely vacated the property as agreed in the contract. We cannot have any delays." Tyler nodded quickly, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "My father left yesterday afternoon," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He checked into a private care home. The house is completely empty, clean, and ready for your crew. There will be no delays on our end. At exactly 9 a.m. sharp." Tyler's phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a text message from the Porsche dealership, confirming that the new Macan was ready for pickup. Instead, his screen flashed with a notification from Wainwright & Associates law office. Tyler opened the email. I watched his face through the security camera feed of the conference room, which I had hacked into via Wainwright's corporate security access. His confident smile vanished, his jaw went slack, and the color began to drain from his skin, turning him a sick pasty gray. The email was short, written in the cold, unyielding language of the law. Pursuant to Section 4, Paragraph C of the Blackwood Family Trust, the trustee has officially triggered the moral turpitude and misconduct clause. All funds associated with the trust accounts ending in 4088 have been frozen immediately. All supplementary credit and debit cards have been deactivated. The remaining balance of $2.145 NOSIN has been reverted to the principal charity, the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. You are no longer authorized to access or utilize any trust assets. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. He tapped frantically on his mobile banking app, his fingers trembling so badly he almost dropped the phone. He logged in, hoping it was a mistake, a system error. Balance. Account frozen. His chest tightened. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked through his veins. He looked at Brittany, who was busy checking her lipstick in a small compact mirror, completely unaware that their golden lease on life had just been cancelled. He tried to rationalize it. He would deal with the trust later. He would call the bank and argue. But right now, he just needed to sign this deed. Once the buyer's $175 million cleared, he would have enough cash to pay off Marcus, buy the Porsche, and figure out the rest. "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Gable said, tapping the signature line on the deed. "We are ready for your signature as the attorney-in-fact for Conrad Blackwood." Tyler picked up the heavy gold pen Mrs. Gable had provided. His hand was shaking violently. He pressed the nib to the paper, his mind racing. Before he could write the first letter of my name, the heavy glass door of the conference room opened. It wasn't a secretary carrying coffee. It was a tall, distinguished man in a tailored charcoal suit, accompanied by two men in dark overcoats with federal badges pinned to their lapels. The man in the suit was my lawyer, Arthur Wainwright. The two men beside him were special agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Tyler dropped the pen. It rolled across the glass table, leaving a thin smear of black ink across the clean white deed. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison, the buyer's attorney, asked, standing up in annoyance. "We are in the middle of a private closing transaction." "Who are you?" Wainwright walked calmly to the table, placing a thick blue folder in front of Mrs. Gable and the buyer. "My name is Arthur Wainwright, and I represent the Blackwood Family Trust and the Blackwood Charitable Foundation. This closing is officially terminated. The seller has no legal authority to convey title to this property." Brittany stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, her voice shrill and defensive. "What are you talking about? That's our house, Tyler. Has the power of attorney. We have the right to sell it. The power of attorney your husband submitted, Mrs. Blackwood, expired 3 years ago," Wainwright said, his voice cold, steady, and loud enough to echo in the quiet room. "It was signed in 2021, solely for the purpose of medical emergency management during Mr. Blackwood's heart surgery, according to the records. That authority terminated 48 hours after his discharge. Furthermore, the property at 1404 Hillside Drive was legally transferred to the Blackwood Charitable Trust in 2022. Warren Conrad Blackwood is the sole trustee, and the trust explicitly prohibits the sale of real estate assets without a unanimous vote of the charitable board, of which your husband is not a member. Your husband forged his father's signature on a new deed, utilizing an old light table in the library to trace the signature from an old tax document. He then submitted a fraudulent power of attorney to execute this transaction. We have already submitted the signature analysis from a certified document examiner to the federal prosecutor. That is a federal offense involving interstate wire fraud, grand larceny, and document forgery." Harrison, the buyer's lawyer, turned pale. He looked at Tyler, his eyes narrowing. "Tyler, you took a $50,000 non-refundable cash deposit from my client yesterday morning under false pretenses. Where is that money?" Tyler sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. He looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape. But there was no escape from the 42nd floor. One of the FBI agents stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Tyler Blackwood, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and grand theft. Brittany Blackwood, you are under arrest as an accomplice to financial fraud." Brittany let out a sharp shriek. "No. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. It was all him. He told me the house was his inheritance. He bought me a Porsche. You signed the supplementary closing documents as a witness, Mrs. Blackwood," the agent said, stepping around the table. "And you spent funds from the trust accounts after the warning was issued. Place your hands behind your back." The conference room descended into a chaotic scene of tears and screaming. Brittany sobbed hysterically, kicking her heels against the marble floor, screaming at Tyler. calling him a liar and a failure. Tyler did not scream. He did not fight. He stood up silently, letting the agent pull his arms behind his back, his head hanging low, his face the color of ashes. They were escorted out of the glass conference room, through the main lobby in front of dozens of staring escrow employees, and into the waiting elevator. The walk through the office was a public execution of their pride. Employees stood up from their desks, staring in silence as the wealthy, arrogant couple who had walked in like royalty was led away in steel handcuffs. Brittany was in complete hysterics. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off the marble walls of the lobby. "This is a mistake! Get your hands off me! My father is a billionaire! He will have all of you fired by dinner. Tyler, do something. Why aren't you saying anything?" Tyler remained silent. He stood with his head bowed, his hands cuffed behind his back, his shoulders slumped. He looked 10 years older. In the elevator, Brittany's panic turned into pure rage. She turned on Tyler, screaming at him, accusing him of lying, of stealing, of destroying her life. "You told me the house was yours. You told me your father was senile. You bought that stupid Porsche to show off, and now I'm in handcuffs because of your lies. I hate you. I want a divorce." Tyler didn't answer. He simply stared at the polished metal doors of the elevator, watching his reflection shake. He knew the reality. He knew that Marcus's debt was unpaid and the $50,000 deposit was gone. They were led out of the lobby of the skyscraper and onto the wet street, where 3 police cruisers were parked, with their lights flashing. Passers-by stopped in the rain to watch and take photos as Brittany, screaming and crying, was pushed into the back seat of one cruiser, and Tyler was loaded into another. The ride to the federal detention center was silent, the sound of the rain beating against the roof and the crackle of the police radio the only noises. Tyler stared out the window at the gray skyline of Seattle, realizing that the castle he had tried to build on a foundation of lies had collapsed, burying him underneath it. Brittany was in complete hysterics. She was screaming that her life was ruined, accusing Tyler of destroying her future, and throwing her expensive designer heels at him in the elevator. She shrieked that she was a Fitzgerald, that her father had millions, that she didn't belong in handcuffs. The federal agents remained calm, their faces expressionless, ignoring her noise. Tyler did not make a sound. He stood with his head bowed, his hands cuffed behind his back, staring at his shoes. He knew the reality. He knew that without the $175 million, he could not pay Marcus, and he knew that Marcus's reach extended even into the county jail. They were taken to the federal courthouse for their initial arraignment before the magistrate judge. Wainwright was present to represent the trust and ensure that no bail was set using trust assets. The federal prosecutor laid out the charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit larceny, and grand document forgery. Because Tyler was identified as a flight risk with substantial gambling debts, and because he had forged federal documents, the magistrate denied him bail, ordering him held at the detention center pending trial. Brittany was granted a $250,000 bond, but since her credit cards were frozen and her family accounts locked, she had to contact her estranged parents to post the bond. They refused to cover the full amount, leaving her in the county jail for 2 weeks before they finally agreed to post a cash bond using their own retirement home equity on the condition that she move into a halfway house and get a job. Meanwhile, Marcus's gang was searching for Tyler. When Marcus found out that the $50,000 cash deposit was seized as evidence of a crime and the house sale was blocked, his enforcers Boris and Jimmy went to the Hillside Drive property. But they found the gates locked and a professional security team hired by the Blackwood Charitable Foundation guarding the house. Boris and Jimmy realized they would never get their money back from Tyler, and they vanished into the Seattle underworld, leaving Tyler to face his trial alone. I watched the police cruisers pull away from the building on the street-level security cameras from my hotel suite. I took a slow sip of my scotch, feeling the quiet weight of justice settle over the room. The trash had finally been taken out, and the foundation of my life was secure once more. 3 months later, I was sitting on the stern of a 50-foot classic sailing yacht named the Sea Close, docked in the beautiful harbor of Naples, Italy. The warm Mediterranean sun beat down on my face, and the air smelled of salt, pine, and fresh lemons. My friends, Edward and Sarah, were sitting at the teak table on the deck, laughing as they enjoyed a bottle of cold white wine. Edward was a retired maritime lawyer, with whom I had worked on several federal cases involving shipping tax evasion, and Sarah was a landscape designer who had helped me plan the gardens at Hillside Drive years ago. They were the kind of genuine friends who valued honesty, quiet conversations, and the simple beauty of the ocean. We had spent the last month cruising along the Amalfi Coast on my classic yacht, a beautiful 70-foot wooden vessel named the Legacy that I had purchased and maintained with a specialized restoration crew. We had watched the colorful houses of Positano, Ravello, and Amalfi cling precariously to the steep cliffs, their terracotta roofs glowing gold in the sunset. We listened to the soft, rhythmic lap of the waves against the polished wooden hull at night, while we anchored in quiet coves. It was a world away from the constant rain, the cold concrete, and the toxic betrayal of Seattle. It was a sanctuary of peace, where the only schedule we kept was determined by the wind and the tides. For the first time in 10 years, I felt my shoulders relax, the tension of constant vigilance dissolving in the warm Italian sun. I had spent so long hiding my wealth, playing the role of the poor bookkeeper to protect my son's ego, that I had forgotten what it felt like to live without fear or constraint. We had spent the morning exploring the historic ruins of Pompeii, walking through the ancient stone streets that had been buried in Vesuvius's volcanic ash for centuries. It was a sobering reminder that everything built by human hands can vanish in Vesuvius's flames if the foundation is compromised. Now we were resting on the deck, enjoying a light lunch of fresh grilled octopus, local tomatoes, and lemon cake prepared by our onboard chef. Edward raised his glass of Greco di Tufo, the cold white wine catching the gold of the afternoon sun. "Two-piece, Conrad. You've earned this journey." "Thank you, Edward," I said, clinking my glass against his. "It's a beautiful day to be alive." As we spoke, a deckhand named Marco approached, bowing politely and handing me a package that had been forwarded from Wainwright's office in Seattle. It was a heavy, waterproof cardboard envelope sealed with secure corporate tape. Inside was a bundle of legal documents regarding the final liquidation of Tyler's personal assets. His luxury clothes, his watches, and the furniture they had purchased for the house were all auctioned off to cover the cost of the legal proceedings and restore the Victorian house to its original state. The envelope also contained a smaller, handwritten letter written on cheap, yellow-lined paper. The return address was a correction facility's halfway house in Washington state. Brittany had been living there for 3 months, working at a local laundry service to pay her court fees while awaiting her final sentencing hearing. Tyler had already agreed to a plea deal, accepting an 8-year sentence in federal prison with no possibility of parole. It was a letter from Brittany. She was out on bail, awaiting her final sentencing, her dreams of luxury reduced to a shared room, a strict curfew and community service. I sat on the stern of the boat, the letter heavy in my hand, and opened it. The handwriting was messy, the ink smeared in places as if she had been crying while she wrote. "Dear Conrad, I am writing this to you because I have nowhere else to turn. I know you hate me, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what happened, but I am completely alone and desperate. I am currently staying in a state-run halfway house in North Seattle. It's a crowded, noisy facility with strict curfews and drug testing protocols. I share a room with 3 other women, and I work 10 hours a day at a local laundry facility folding sheets just to pay my basic court-ordered fees and buy groceries. My hands are raw, my back is always sore, and my credit is completely ruined. My parents have completely disowned me. They refuse to answer my calls or help me with a single dollar. Conrad, the baby is coming in exactly 2 months. It's a boy. I have no money to buy a crib, no money for baby clothes, and no way to afford health insurance or a decent place to live. Tyler is gone. His appeal was rejected, and he is facing 8 years in a federal detention center in Oregon. He won't be there to help me, and he won't be there to see his son take his first steps. You are the only person left who has the power to save us. I know this child isn't your direct bloodline, but he is still innocent. He deserves a chance at a healthy life, a safe home, and a grandfather who can teach him the values that Tyler forgot. Please, Conrad, I am begging you on my knees. I don't ask for luxury or credit cards. Just help us get a small, safe one-bedroom apartment somewhere quiet. Just a roof over our heads so my baby doesn't have to start his life in a shelter. That is all I ask. Please find it in your heart to forgive me. I read it twice, analyzing the structure of her sentences, just as I used to analyze fraudulent tax returns, searching for the truth hidden behind the emotional words. But there was no truth there. I read the letter twice, analyzing the structure of her sentences, just as I used to analyze fraudulent tax returns and shell company prospectuses, looking for the telltale signs of manipulation. It wasn't a plea for redemption or a sincere expression of remorse. It was a carefully structured request for a capital resource. She did not apologize for throwing my suitcase down the stairs. She did not mention the damage they had done to the Victorian house. She did not express any regret for trying to lock me in Sunny Valley. She only spoke of her own discomfort, her own physical pain, and her own lack of funds. She was using an unborn child as a financial lever, a human shield to guilt me into opening my accounts once more. It was the same tactic she had used to manipulate Tyler, and the same one they had tried to use against me in the title office. She hadn't changed her values. She had only changed her circumstances. She was just desperate. And, in my years of experience, I had learned that desperation is not the same thing as repentance. Desperate people will say whatever is necessary to secure a resource, but the moment the pressure is lifted, the old patterns of greed and entitlement return. If I bought her an apartment, she would soon ask for a car to get to work, then a monthly allowance for the baby, then a secondary credit card for emergencies. It would never end. The transaction was closed, and I was not going to reopen the books. I pulled a silver lighter from my pocket, the flame flickering slightly in the warm sea breeze. I held the corner of the letter to the fire, watching the cheap paper curl, turn black, and ignite. The words family and help turned to ash, dissolving into the wind, scattering over the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea. I watched the last ember die out, dusting the soot from my fingers. It was the final transaction, the last debt canceled. Edward called out from the bow, asking if I was ready for lunch. The rich smell of grilled seafood and lemon drifted back to me, a promise of a good meal and good company. I stood up, turning my back on the wake of the ship, on the ashes, and on the past. I had spent my entire life building a roof for others, sacrificing my own comfort and peace to keep them dry. Now it was time I build peace for myself, and that peace has no room for traitors. Many of us are raised with the cultural narrative that family is absolute, that parents must sacrifice their own dignity, comfort, and peace endlessly for the sake of their children, regardless of how ungrateful, cruel, or destructive those children become. But my experience proves that unconditional love without firm, logical boundaries is not a virtue. It is a recipe for disaster. By protecting Tyler from every minor failure in his youth, by paying off his debts and covering his mistakes, I didn't help him grow. I crippled his character. I turned him into an entitled parasite who believed the world owed him luxury, and who eventually viewed his own father as a disposable resource. I learned that true wealth is not the number printed on your bank statement, nor is it the brand of the car parked in your driveway. True wealth is the freedom to wake up every morning without fear, guilt, or obligation. It is the luxury of quiet mornings, clean relationships, and a clear conscience. You cannot buy respect, you cannot negotiate with greed, and you cannot save people who view you only as an asset to be liquidated. Sometimes, the hardest, most loving thing you can do for them, and the only way to preserve your own dignity, is to let them hit the bottom of the stairs and face the consequences of their own actions. If you believe that dignity is worth more than any inheritance, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. And tell me in the comments, would you have burned the letter, or would you have given them one last chance?